This event today is being brought to you by ACR Electronics and the United States Coast Guard and the National Safe Boating Council. Well, we've been in business for 50 years of providing forward-looking technologies and products that help in the search and finding and rescuing of people who found themselves in harm's way. And we're pretty proud of that heritage, especially so when ACR equipment is used in a rescue. Now, being a part of the industry means more than just providing products and services. It's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that people are properly educated and trained, understand the need for preparation and the use of best practices before a rescue even occurs. So the real fundamental reason for tonight is to increase that awareness so that people know and understand that being prepared, having the right equipment, making sure it's tested, goes a long way in providing the people who receive the signals, dispatch the crews, and come to find the people that are having trouble and make a rescue successful. And that's what this event is all about.
We just got an announcement from the captain of the boat that there is an actual rescue happening out on the water. We have found out that a man has gone overboard. Man overboard! Now at this point in time, we do see our man overboard. He has already inflated his life jacket. First and foremost, we must remember that anytime we go out boating, we must be prepared beforehand. That means wearing our life jacket, having our EPIRB ready to go, filing a float plan, among other things. We see now that he has actually activated his EPIRB. And at this point in time, I'm going to have some fellow panel members come up with me, and we are going to walk you through this man's rescue. While this man is waiting for his EPIRB to be picked up through the satellite, I want to go ahead and introduce my fellow panel members here with me. Starting over to my right, we have Captain Hodges. Captain Hodges, can you please introduce yourself?
I'm Captain Mark Hodges. I'm the area supervisor for Florida Fish and Wildlife.
Great, and Captain Coggeshall.
Hi, I'm Captain Todd Coggeshall. I'm the District 7 Chief of Search and Rescue. We run search and rescue in South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and throughout the Caribbean Basin with our international partners.
Okay, and to my immediate right, we have David Dillinger.
Hi, I'm David Dillinger. I'm the Port Meteorological Officer for South Florida. I'm also the NOAA rep for today's exercise.
Thank you. And I am Rachel Johnson, Executive Director of the National Safe Boating Council. We want to thank you all so much for joining us here this evening for this panel. So let's go ahead right now and talk about what happened immediately after that boater got into the water and activated his EPIRB.
Well, from the NOAA side, once he activated the EPIRB, it's about 7 minutes it takes for us to receive the satellite data. Actually, the satellite data is pretty immediate. If it's a polar orbiting satellite, we're getting the data. The Doppler is triangulating its position. If there's a GPS signal embedded into the EPIRB, it's almost immediately we get his exact position, and we're actually feeding that to the command center, to the Coast Guard, almost immediately. But the total triangulation, if there's no GPS signal, it takes about 7 minutes for us to get the signal, resolve its position, and get that information to the Coast Guard, and for them to start responding with their assets. They make the call whether it's their assets or first responder assets. If there's not a polar orbiting satellite over top, there's a geostationary satellites. They're about 23,000 miles in space. Those are a little bit harder for us to triangulate. If there's a GPS signal embedded in the EPIRB, then obviously we can get that position fairly quickly. If not, then it takes a little bit more time for us to try to triangulate that position.
So once the Mission Control Center gets that information from the satellite and passes it to the Rescue Coordination Center, which is the 7th District, is one of those rescue coordination centers, then the detective work begins. And depending on what the person's done with that EPIRB when they bought it, identifies, just how much detective work we have to do. If they just bought the EPIRB and put it on their boat and it didn't do anything else, we might have a position, but it might be unlocated. So if it's unlocated and unregistered, we don't have anything to go on. We don't know basically where to go look.
That's key.
If the person has registered their EPIRB and kept it up to date as they moved or the boat sold or whatnot, now we've got information that's got points of contact that we can reach out to identify, the home port of the vessel, who's on the vessel. We can call them and say, hey, yes, my husband or my wife and kids are out on the water today. That raises our apprehension level. We treat every EPIRB that we get from the Mission Command Center as a mayday. So with that, we start trying to identify whether or not there's an actual distress. We put out an urgent marine information broadcast to the general boating community. Like in this case, about now we put out an urgent marine information broadcast from Sector Miami that would cover Biscayne Bay here. And we have all these recreational boaters moving around. Our interagency partners are listening to the frequency, and people can start being on the lookout for the boater in distress. If we've got good information and we've got a good location and we think we know where to look and we need to move quickly, our watch standers will call out to Coast Guard Air Station Miami or one of our other air stations if it's outside of this area, and start to brief the crew on the location of the distress, the type of vessel. If it's fully registered, we'll even pull up Google Images and see if we can get a picture of the vessel, so we know where we're going. After the crew does their operational risk assessment, this can be happening at night, bad weather. Emergencies don't always happen on nights like this, unfortunately. So we'll brief the crew. They'll do the operational risk assessment. We'll determine what the best asset, whether it's a surface asset, a merchant mariner, if it's way offshore, or a fish and wildlife boat. And then the aircraft will come in, and they've got a homer on board the aircraft that they can monitor the channel. Try and get a point on this. And at this point, we've got a very squared away survivor who's not only got a life jacket and an EPIRB, but he's also got a smoke signaling device, so he's readily apparent to the helicopter. So the helicopter will come by, identify the survivor, and then they'll either enter an orbit or come down a little bit lower to determine whether or not they're in distress. And at this part, since we're in Biscayne Bay and there's lots of boats around and Fish and Wildlife's on scene, more than likely they're going to get on the radio and call Fish and Wildlife.
Right. We have officers that are patrolling all the time, working with the Coast Guard. Once they hear the distress, it also comes through our dispatch center, which we are co-located with the Florida Highway Patrol out in Doral. And we would dispatch on the open frequency, the nearest unit in the vicinity, which we received the lat long from the Coast Guard, and our closest boats would actually converge on that. That's the first step. Once the boat arrives on scene, recovers the survivor, then we try to ascertain, well, what exactly happened? Was it a boating accident? Was it an intentional? We've actually rolled up on cases like that where people tried to deliberately scuttle their boats. So at that point, once the recovery is done, which is what you're seeing now, then the first thing is we want to know, we've got a recovery, how many people are there? Is he the only one that's in need of being rescued? And then we relay all this information to the Coast Guard. And then at that point, we start going into an investigative mode to find out exactly what happened. And with any rescue like this, another priority is to find out their medical needs. And that's when we'll ascertain whether or not do we need to do an airlift with the Coast Guard, or if fire rescue happens to be in the area with one of the fire boats, then a lot of times they can meet the medical needs, and that also keeps the cost down because flying a helicopter is very expensive.
All right, safely aboard.
And it looks like we have a recovery. I'd like to take this time, the actual person being rescued was Officer Dionis Delgado. He's one of the Miami-Dade officers, and Officer Mark Angelis and Officer Paige Pesca were the recovering team.